James Everett had always believed that life could be controlled, measured, and predicted, much like the numbers he watched every day on his screens. But that morning, as sunlight filtered coldly through the towering glass of his office, all of that certainty shattered. The stock market had imploded overnight, sweeping away billions with a single merciless wave. James sat motionless, staring at the flashing red numbers on his monitors, his heart thudding in disbelief. Every company he had nurtured, every investment he had painstakingly built over decades, now teetered on the edge of ruin. He had always been proud of his sharp mind and impeccable instincts, yet the chaos of loss left him raw, hollowed out. Calls from anxious board members, frantic partners, and creditors rang endlessly through his phone, each one driving home a single cruel truth: he was no longer untouchable. The life he had constructed with meticulous care, the skyline offices, the luxury cars, the penthouse that once felt like a throne, suddenly seemed meaningless. He could feel the weight of failure pressing on him, suffocating in a way he had never imagined possible. Exhaustion and panic fought within him. Memories of victories, promotions, and accolades flashed in his mind like cruel reminders of what he had lost. He had built his empire on precision and foresight, yet here he was, powerless in the face of a disaster he couldn't predict. He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the office, feeling the walls close in around him. Even the usual comfort of solitude, his private corner of the world, was replaced by a chilling emptiness. Just when despair threatened to swallow him completely, a soft knock on the door broke the silence. James barely looked up. It was Tom, the janitor who had quietly cared for the building for over a decade. A man whose presence had always been background noise to James, unnoticed amid the whirlwind of board meetings and deals. Tom's expression was calm, almost gentle, as he stepped forward holding a small stack of papers. "Sir, you forgot this one paper," Tom said quietly, extending the folder toward him. There was no condescension, no judgment, just a simple insistence, like a hand reaching out in the dark. James blinked, too exhausted to speak at first, unable to comprehend how a small folder could possibly matter in the midst of such devastation. What difference could it make now? James asked, his voice cracking. Tom's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Sometimes, one piece can change everything. You just have to look at it." With trembling hands, James took the folder and opened it. His eyes widened as he recognized the overlooked document, a legal agreement that could reverse the collapse he had feared was final. Relief, disbelief, and a fragile hope began to ripple through him. Tears blurred his vision as he looked at Tom, gratitude spilling forth uncontrollably. You saved me," he whispered. Tom nodded quietly, his face serene, as if what he had done was ordinary. "Sometimes, sir, it's the small things that matter the most." For the first time that day, James felt the weight on his chest lift slightly, replaced by a trembling spark of hope. One forgotten paper, one quiet act, had reminded him that even in ruin, a lifeline could appear when least expected. The morning after discovering the folder, James felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. The weight of despair from the previous day still clung to him like a thick fog, but now, there was a thread of hope weaving through it. He spread the papers carefully on his desk, rereading the overlooked agreement. Every clause, every signature seemed to breathe life back into the wreckage of his finances. What had seemed impossible yesterday now felt attainable, though fragile. He picked up the phone and began calling his lawyers, accountants, and business partners. With each conversation, he could feel the tide shifting. People who had once doubted him, or who had assumed the worst, now paused, reconsidered, and listened. The lost empire wasn't lost after all, it had been teetering on the edge, waiting for someone to notice the lifeline that had been hidden in plain sight. James realized that in his panic, he had overlooked the simplest solution, the one thing that had been quietly sitting under his nose all along. Walking through the office halls, he saw things differently. The staff he had once overlooked, the janitors, the receptionists, the quiet assistants, were no longer invisible. He noticed how they worked tirelessly, often unnoticed, keeping the world running while he chased headlines and deals. And for the first time, he felt a deep gratitude for them, a humility that pricked at his pride. He understood now that fortune was not merely about money. It was about noticing the people around you, the small acts that often make the biggest difference. Later that morning, James found Tom in the corridor, pushing his cleaning cart. He stopped him gently, kneeling beside the man who had been so ordinary yet extraordinary in that critical moment. "I don't know how to thank you," James said, his voice unsteady. Tom shook his head with a modest smile. "You don't need to. You just needed to look a little closer." James felt a lump in his throat, realizing the truth in Tom's words. In his obsession with wealth and control, he had forgotten that life is sustained by quiet diligence, by people who see what others overlook. He had been so focused on the grandeur of his empire that he had almost missed the lifeline he needed most. As James returned to his office, he felt a subtle shift in himself. The panic that had gripped him was replaced by determination, not just to reclaim his fortune, but to do so with eyes wide open, noticing the humanity around him. He realized that wealth without awareness, without gratitude, was hollow. And perhaps, he thought with a small smile, it was never too late to learn that lesson. The day unfolded slowly, with meetings, phone calls, and painstaking decisions, but James carried a new clarity within him. One small act of attentiveness, the quiet insistence of a janitor, had reminded him that hope often arrives disguised as something ordinary. And in that ordinary, he had found something extraordinary, a second chance. Weeks passed, and James's life began to regain its balance, though it was no longer the same. The financial chaos had been mitigated, his fortune restored in ways that were both cautious and secure, but the real transformation had happened inside him. He no longer measured success purely in numbers, stocks, or luxury. He measured it in quiet acts of care, the small gestures that could turn despair into hope. And he never forgot Tom, the janitor who had reminded him of that truth. James decided to do more than repay his own fortune. He wanted to honor those who, like Tom, worked tirelessly without recognition, whose efforts kept the world moving while the spotlight never touched them. He established a foundation dedicated to supporting the unsung heroes, the people whose dedication and quiet wisdom often went unnoticed in the corridors of power. It was a decision that filled him with purpose, a purpose far greater than mere wealth. The day of the foundation's inaugural event arrived, and James stood among people he had once overlooked, staff and employees who had long labored in silence. The room was filled with laughter, gratitude, and stories of kindness. And there, near the back, Tom stood quietly, modest as ever, holding a small cup of coffee and watching with gentle amusement as the man whose life he had quietly saved transformed into someone who truly saw the world around him. James approached Tom, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. "I wanted you to be here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me what really matters. I don't have words to express my gratitude, but I hope this shows a little of what you've given me." He handed Tom a simple plaque, engraved with a message that felt more heartfelt than anything money could buy, "For reminding me of the power of small acts, and the greatness of quiet hearts." Tom shook his head, smiling gently. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. His humility was effortless, yet it carried the weight of wisdom James would never forget. James realized then that fortune was more than wealth. It was the recognition of kindness, the acknowledgement of those who lift others without expectation, and the courage to see value in what is often ignored. The foundation would carry that lesson forward, touching lives far beyond his own. That evening, as James looked out over the city skyline from his office window, he felt a deep and lasting peace. The world had once seemed unforgiving and harsh, but now he understood that hope often arrives quietly, wrapped in the hands of someone you might never expect. One forgotten paper, one janitor's insistence, had changed everything, not just his wealth, but his heart. And for the first time in his life, James knew the true measure of fortune, not the numbers on a screen, but the people, the moments, and the quiet acts of love that endure long after the markets have fallen.